Welcome to the Final Ghost podcast, where we explore the intersections of horror film and feminism. This is Anna, co-founder of the Final Ghost and your podcast host. We've just wrapped up our second series of the podcast, which was all about female monsters. And before we launch into our third series, we'll be covering new films and series that we really want to talk about. And it's been an embarrassment of riches recently. Today's bonus episode is all about His House, the feature film debut by writer-director Remi Weekes, which has just been released on Netflix. His House tells the story of refugee couple Bol and Rial, who make a harrowing escape from war-torn South Sudan and then struggle to adjust to their new life in an English town that has an evil lurking just beneath the surface. I'm joined in this episode by podcast regular and writer Layla Latif to talk about the multitude of layers of His House. The first part of our episode will be our overall thoughts on the film in case you haven't seen it yet. And then I will leave a timestamp in the show notes to mark the beginning of our spoilerific discussion of the film for those of you who have seen it already. And you can watch His House everywhere on Netflix. Layla, welcome back again to the podcast. It's funny because we've to be transparent, we've literally just recorded our episode about the Craft Legacy where we savaged it, and now
where I rage drank a big glass of wine.
And now we're going to be talking about a film of a very, very different ilk. So before we dive into our conversation about His House, the first part of our conversation will be spoiler free, so we'll kind of just be covering our overall thoughts about the film, and then I'll make a very, very clear separation between before the spoilerific section starts. So anybody who's not seen His House, which is out now on Netflix globally, you can watch the film and then dive back into the episode. And if you don't really care about spoilers, then you can continue listening. So let's dig into His House, and kind of to kick off, I wanted to ask you, were you familiar with the work of Remi Weekes before his debut?
So I interviewed Remi Weekes for Sight and Sound last month, and I am nothing if not an incredibly well prepared interviewer. So I kind of have had a dive on his full back catalogue. This is his first feature, but previous to that, he was part of this duo called Tell No One, which did kind of the sort of arty fashion films and things for brands, but then also did unbelievably cool adverts and stuff like that. And from talking to Remi, I mean that is kind of where he develops a lot of his skills, because when you watch this film, a lot of his just literal technical ability is very obvious.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, Remi Weekes, I mean, I think it was it was an amicable parting, but he then kind of goes off by himself. As he told me, he kind of didn't really have the confidence before, so he had to kind of very slowly work his way into standing on his own 2 feet. And he made a short, which you can find on More4, called Tickle Monster, which I so strongly recommend. It's one of my favorite horror shorts I've ever seen. It's just a few minutes and just literally about a tickle monster, about there's something in the room that is dark and demonic, but the only thing that it does is tickle you. And it's so brilliant. And yeah, sorry. Have you seen Tickle Monster?
I have. I was just about to say that it's part of this great, it's part of this great initiative that Film 4 did a few years ago, where they commissioned a whole bunch of kind of up and coming young directors to do a horror short. And I saw Tickle Monster as part of that. But all of those are, I think there's about 4, maybe 5 of them. All of them are available to watch online, and they're all 5 minutes and excellent.
Yeah.
Really excellent.
I'm going to dive into that straight afterwards. I only watched the Tickle Monster one.
Yeah, I also really recommend the one that Prano Bailey Bond directed called Shortcut, which is hella fun.
Oh, you're just such a wonderful fountain of knowledge when it comes to these things.
I've watched a lot of shorts. It's where all the really, really cool talent is, really.
That's very true. So then after that, he writes the script, His House. It was who wrote and directed it. And then the Weinstein Company wanted it for a while. And he ended up, this was a couple of years ago, this was a hot script that was going around before we found out about Harvey Weinstein, he didn't want to produce it with them, so they tried to sue him.
What?
Yeah, and then, but luckily Harvey got some bigger problems going on, so that kind of fell by the wayside. And then his house was first at Sundance this February. Is Sundance February? Is that right?
It's January.
Okay, January, and got a great reception, and Netflix picked it up, which I believe at the time people felt was like, oh, that's a shame because this is such a, great film to watch in the cinema. But Remi Weeks comes out on top because the pandemic means that actually in terms of audience and getting this film seen, Netflix is the perfect place for it. And it's clearly their big Halloween film because it's what's coming out Friday the 30th of October.
Yeah. And it also, I think, really works because, it's in the title, but the basic premise of the film is a haunted house. And there is something about watching haunted house film in your house that adds to the horror experience.
It's very true. I'm always reminded, especially whenever I see a horror film that is centered around Black people, that there was a joke from Eddie Murphy's famous comedy special Raw
Yes.
about how you can't make horror films about Black people because they'd immediately leave a haunted house, which is actually where the idea for Get Out came from, is Jordan Peele loving that.
Yeah.
But so as soon as I saw this, I was just like, oh my God, they thought of a reason to keep a Black couple in a house. This is brilliant.
So I love that. I love that you reference it. I love that special by Eddie Murphy.
Me too.
And
I love Eddie Murphy. He's making another comedy special. I'm so excited.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
my
With
God.
Netflix, they're literally paying him $100 million to do it.
I mean, I'm here for it because the punchy, raw Eddie Murphy from the 80s, it was
The leather
exceptional.
suit.
Whew, yeah, but that joke was exceptional. And yes, it's Jordan Peele basically kind of took the title of Get Out from that joke. But so going back to his house, we've sort of skirted around it, but on the surface, it uses the refugee crisis and these two South Sudanese refugees being trapped in this house as the jumping off point. So what do you think of this use of a political crisis and put in the context of a horror film?
Yeah, I was a little wary of it because I'm from Sudan. I grew up in Sudan. My mother's English, my father's Sudanese. I was born here, and I spent my summers in England. But until I was 16, I lived in Sudan. So there was a little part of me when I saw this announced just political background. South Sudan and Sudan were one country until about 10 years ago. And then we split. And since then, in South Sudan, there has been, so they were previously at war, a civil war between North and South. And then when they split, that war ended. But the factions within South Sudan turned on one another. And there has been horrific genocidal war going on in there ever since. It is truly tragic that the world's newest country is basically a failed state already. So I come into it feeling very personally connected to this refugee crisis, to this place, because as much as it is South Sudan, I still think of it as where I'm from. And so I had a tiny bit of just Remi Weeks isn't Sudanese, and Wumi and Sope are Nigerian, playing South Sudanese. So a raised eyebrow, I would say. But I actually think it treats this crisis with such sensitivity and empathy and three-dimensional humanity that all of that didn't matter within 10 seconds.
And how do you think it uses this very familiar setting of a haunted house?
I think haunted house films are quite difficult to pull off, aren't they? Because there's a very tried and tested formula of you have a very creeping sense of terror, which, I've been very immersed in Shirley Jackson recently, but terror as opposed to horror, which is you're worried that something bad is about to happen rather than actually something bad happening. And then that builds, and then we normally have like a middle act where it's just like, are they going mad, or is this something real? And then like the kind of final I mean, like obviously like loads of things break that mold, but that would be like the general tone. And I like that this film actually kind of didn't do that. It's really, really clear that it's real from the beginning, and it's not kind of got it's not going into that like gothic horror subtlety at all. It's very like confronting. And like when I spoke to Remi Weeks, I actually said to him that part of it reminded me of the Thing, which is one of my favorite horror films, where it's the opposite. Sorry, just going back horror history. So the film The Cat People, when that came out, there was this thing called a Luton's bus, which is introduced, which is where you kind of build tension, and then like a cat jumps out, or a bus in this case pulls up, and then it's like, oh, you get a jump scare, but like it wasn't actually anything.
Yeah.
Whilst John Carpenter in The Thing does the opposite, in that like, oh, it's always something terrible. Like it's like, and this reminded me of that. Like it is not a kind of film of like subtle, like, oh, is that a shadow, or is that like a loud sound, but like, oh, don't worry, it's always something, and it is genuinely like super scary rather than just atmospheric.
I couldn't agree more. It keeps that tension constant. There is no letting go of it except for very, very brief moments of respite. But it is still like a fairly bare bones set. It's a fairly bare bones horror, but it maximizes the set, the performances, and the effects that it uses, both practical and special effects. And what do you think is the scariest thing about it?
I think, as much as this is going to sound cheesy, I think the scariest thing about it is like this whole survivor's remorse, which is something that they are dealing with the entire time. So what's so amazingly done is that, as awful as this is not the worst thing that has happened to them. And they're sort of dealing with that. So you're kind of getting these intense scares, and then you have this extra layer that is hitting you of just like, oh my God, and this is a reality that's happening all the time. People drowning in the channel, people like fleeing the most like horrific violence. So, I mean, sure, there's like some incredible special effects. There are incredible like jumping, terrifying moments, but then what stays with you afterwards is like, just like an overall message of like resilience and survivor's remorse. I mean, I'm glad to hear that you liked it, by the sounds of it, almost as much as I do, because there's just so many layers to this film that work brilliantly. I really like the practical effects. What did you think of them?
Oh, I absolutely love this. I did not put two and two together, I'll admit, when I watched it a while back, and I was just glued. It was tense. There was images there that I recognized and others that I had never seen before. And this is, obviously because of my own background. It managed, I think, to navigate very, very smartly that very difficult tightrope between being a heavily political and not so much message driven, I think, but a film that operates on several different levels, and several different levels of political discourse and political criticism, and also just exploring the humanity behind headlines that are very easily made into either kind of twisted, kind of layered and covered and smeared, and kind of stories that are smeared in white guilt, basically, as opposed to human or kind of expansive, kind of political and nuanced stories that contextualize a particular issue or a political crisis. And this just, it hinted at the human cost of it, as opposed to trying to make it into some sort of palatable narrative. It wasn't really concerned with that. It wasn't concerned with making it palatable for me. It was much more concerned with really zeroing in on the experience of the lead characters.
Yeah.
And that made it so much more powerful, and also made it work so well for me as a horror film, because I was completely terrified for them. I was tense for them because they were, the way that I saw it, kind of living in two very different horror films. The horror film that was happening inside their house, and the horror film, well, three actually, the horror film that was happening in their minds, in their memories, and the experiences that they had been through, and the everyday horror that they were facing whenever they left the house and had to confront their new reality.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that is what is so interesting about this film, that like at most I think you're expecting two layers and then you just get a third. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. I think it might be my favorite horror this year.
Oh, definitely up there for me as well. And
yeah.
Before we move on to some of the more kind of spoilery detail of the film, I have to ask you, what did you think about the lead performances?
Okay, so like full disclosure, I know both Wunmi and Sope. So I was a little bit biased. Now Wunmi
Aren't
went to
you
university.
lucky?
Yeah, Wunmi is like the most wonderful, charismatic, incredible human being. And I really don't think she gets anywhere near as much credit as she does, because she first kind of came onto the scene. She went to university with my sister, which is how I know her. She came onto the scene is in a drama called Damalola, Our Precious Boy, or something along those lines, for which she was nominated for an Emmy, which is an English actress. You really think it would be... What? We would get her... Yeah, she was nominated for the Best Actress Emmy for this role, and like the buzz around her that the media gave her in this country was like ridiculously just like, oh yeah, fine. I really feel if it was like a young, thin, blonde, posh white girl who had been like straight out of RADA, gets nominated for an Emmy for Best Actress, like we would have seen her on the cover of magazines everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she's been doing steady, amazing work ever since. She was the best thing about the recent series of Luther. She was amazing in Black Mirror. She's currently on Lovecraft Country, and this is her first like lead role in a film. She's amazing in it. She's just fucking incredible. Like, she's coming up on the new Loki series as well. But, she really needs to get more attention and more credit than she does. And then Sope, I don't really know. I've met him once. So just before lockdown, the last thing in February, I was at a house party of my sister's, and she is a director. So, and like Black kind of filmmaking community is like reasonably small. And he was there, and when there's just somebody who is like that magnetic and handsome and such beautiful arms, that I swear to God, there was a small queue that formed in the party of everybody that just was like taking their turn to speak to him. I am a happily married woman, but I just kind of stood there being just like, soon. I was in the queue. I think I started the queue. And then I turned around and like my friend Isabel's in the queue. My younger sister Sarah, she's like, "Oh, you joined the queue, cool." Yeah, this.
I love that you mentioned the arms.
Oh my God, his arms, his beautiful, beautiful arms.
But yeah, what did you?
He's a lot more handsome in real life. I think they actually kind of like. I think they lit him a little purposefully harshly in this, because he is a beautiful, beautiful man.
Stop it! I can't. I'm not in the mind frame to deal with that amount of handsomeness right now. So
he wouldn't know who I was, but I feel I know him. I stood in that queue.
Well, maybe if he listens to this episode, he'll know exactly who you are.
Yeah, fingers crossed. They're both phenomenal. I feel like these are two of our most exciting young British actors at the moment, and I just hope that they get the attention that they deserve for this. I mean, in particular, Wunmi, who has just been so solidly the best thing in things for so long now. Oh, she's also in The End of the Fucking World. She's great in that. She's phenomenal.
So before we move into spoilers, do you think horror fans will enjoy this film?
I think they'll love this film. I think they'll also be very impressed by this film, because the best horror is like not quite what you expect. And I think I've just like, I'm already dreading that there's going to be 1,000 think pieces about this and its place in like elevated horror,
Mm-hmm.
which speaks to like, you know, politics, like as if like Frankenstein and Dracula weren't written a really, really long time ago at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But this is elevated for me in the sense of it doesn't like fit a perfect mold of what you expect a haunted house film to be, or like kind of a politically satirical horror to be, or a black horror film to be. It's firing on so many cylinders, and I just like, weird, even though like I'm a film critic, I don't like recommending films that much. This is one of the ones where I'm just like, I am 100% confident, like this is a wonderful thing that anyone I think would get a lot from, because it's also quite funny. Like, and it's really sad in places, but like the fact that like in the midst of all that, it's really funny at times.
So let's dig in a little bit deeper into his house in the spoiler section.
Congratulations. You're being released as asylum seekers, not as citizens, not yet. You will be sent to a home of our choosing. You must not move from this address.
We are good people.
Whether or not you're good people, it's not me that needs convincing.
It's a palace.
This entire house is just for us.
It's gonna be nice, you're gonna be happy.
As long as you can get along, fit in.
Be one of the good ones.
This is our home.
All I can taste is the metal.
We'll get used to it.
I saw something in the dark. You have felt it too.
You having problems with the property?
This is what they want. They like to see us crazy. Let them send us back.
How quickly you forget.
Okay, so we've kind of talked around the film, and it's pretty obvious that we both really, really love it. So I didn't want to go into the characters of Rial and Bol before, because there's so much nuance to their relationship that I think it's borderline and impossible to talk about it without spoiling it. So what did you make of their relationship and the tensions and the resolution of it?
I was so impressed by them and so impressed by these performances, because what they're doing is like so technically difficult in that they are getting us to buy into a marriage where we literally see none of the good times. We don't see like any of, any like real moments of happiness, but we still believe in this as being like a relationship, even though it's just, but they don't feel like they're trauma bonded. They feel like this is like a functioning thing, and they have an easiness and a like shortness of language and a depth to how they interact with one another. Oh, God. Like, it's such a joy to come across a film that is this good, and it's just like, in the genre that you love the most, and has like such wonderful performances, and also from like actors that, one for friendship reason and for the other one for arms reasons, that like I really want the best for. And I would also say Remi Weekes, having spoken to him, is like the nicest man alive, which feeds into my theory that horror fans are actually the world's best people, because we're naturally extremely empathetic.
Oh, I 100% support this theory.
Good.
And it's evidenced by all you and all the amazing people that come onto this podcast. But there's something that you mentioned that I want to pick up on, and it's kind of the way that actually you mentioned the sort of the shared language, or the shared kind of shortness of exchanges that they have with one another. That's very that's sort of a natural thing that evolves with intimacy and with a long-standing relationship. So one of the things I did find interesting as a constant immigrant as well, who constantly jumps between different languages, is the way that they spoke and this emphasis on shifting languages as well, and the tension that it created. So what did you think about that?
I think I really liked that. It really spoke to, I think a lot of people have, is this immigrant experience of just wanting to be one of the good ones, wanting to kind of, I mean, it's not something that I feel now, but like certainly when I was at university, I was very lucky. I went to school at a very ethnically diverse place, and there was a lot of girls from China and Nigeria, and like, so I didn't feel that pressure then. But when I went to university, it was very, very white English, and you feel this like constant thing of like, oh, I have an Arabic last name, I need to like let people know like I'm not like one of them, like I'm fun, and like, you know, and also I went to university in like, you know, 15 years ago. Well, how old am I? You know, quite a while ago. And, you know, height of the war on terror, it was not a good time to have my middle name is Osama. So it was like not a great time to have that name. And so it was heartbreaking for me. And there's a scene in particular where, because football is a universal language, that Bol goes to the pub and he knows the word to a song about Peter Crouch. And he has this moment of joy where he's like, I fit in. They like think I'm one of them. And it's just heartbreakingly beautiful. And it just shows Remi Weekes' intelligence as a filmmaker, where it's not like The Craft. We're not having people just explicitly say what they feel or like just tell you characteristics about themselves. He can show these things with like such subtlety. And like just in that moment where Bol is singing along, we have like what would take many films like scenes after scene after scene of character development happening there. Oh yeah, no, I feel like I can't say enough good things about this film and about Remi Weekes. I mean, I think it's really exciting for, you know, the UK to have such a cool, young, interesting director that like this is his debut is insane.
It's shocking. It's shocking that this is his debut, and kind of sticking on that scene in particular. But also there's another one that really, I think, illustrates this tension between Rial and Bol, and it's when she gets lost and then kind of bullied might not be the right word, but she gets sort of mocked by these kids, and she approaches them because she assumes that they're safe, that they're going to help her. They're kind of black kids on this in this, I don't actually know what town they're supposed to be based in. I can't remember.
It never says. It doesn't specify.
Never says.
Yeah.
And they mock her and they make fun of her and they tell her to, you know, go away.
Yeah. I think it was like, fuck off back to Africa, something along those lines.
Something along those lines. And I wanted to kind of ask you what you thought about the way that their experiences with England, kind of this unnamed town, illustrate this theme of belonging.
Yeah, because I mean, there's some amazing stuff with that, which is done through Rial's character. So she's got, I mean, back home in Sudan, like scarification is quite a big thing. My great grandmother had like these like long vertical cuts down going through her face, much more dramatic than anything that Rial has. And it's, you know, it's a pretty dark process because they want the scars to be as significant as they can, so they reopen them and you pack them full of dirt, and if they get infected, even better, because that will make the scar more prominent. But in Rial's case, she has two tribes marking scarred on her face, because she's kind of from both places and she wants to be able to fit into both, but she ends up fitting in nowhere. And now she's still got that like restless element to her when she's in the UK but you know, she's not trying to fit in the same way that Bol does, where Bol is like, we're here, we're going to be one of them, we're going to be the good ones. There's a really funny and sweet scene where he goes to Tesco and sees a like advert of a white family, and he just buys them the exact outfits so they'll kind of fit in and look exactly like them. But the subtleties of the film are so great, because even in that scene, while that's the major thing that's happening, in the background, if you notice, the security man won't stop following him. And it's like, I think that's what Remi Weekes does so well, is he's just like building such a complex picture in any single scene. Oh, loved it. So you watched it a little while ago. I watched it about a month ago, and I've kind of been really excited for it to come down on Netflix. Netflix
Same.
sent me a screener, but only for like 24 hours, so I couldn't rewatch.
Yeah, no, same. I watched it a while ago, but there's quite a significant, like, there's quite significant imagery that's really stuck in my head, and I wanted to hear your thoughts kind of about the horror imagery. You know, it's interesting that in this year, in this time, this pandemic and stuff, there's quite a lot of stories coming out about kind of hauntings, and I'm thinking about Host, I'm thinking about The Haunting of Bly Manor, obviously, all very yes. Yes. Weirdly, I watched The Haunting of Bly Manor in his house. Well, I watched 4 episodes of The Haunting of Bly Manor in his house on the same day.
Right. Which 4? That matters.
First 4.
Okay. You would have been angrier if it had been the last 4.
I was angry, and then we switched to his house, and I was like, this is such a palate cleanser. This is gorgeous. This is what horror should be.
I know. And I remember when I spoke to Remi, and he was saying that he feels very like philosophical about the world and like how things work and like how everything goes. So what he wanted to whilst he's not that interested in violence, and there is some violence in this, but he's more interested in like building nightmare worlds. And I think that like so many horror films would be so much better if that was their focus, about like, let me build this like complex nightmare and let me build a character and then tailor this nightmare to him. Because if you just have those 2 ingredients, it's going to be compelling viewing.
Yes. And so to go back to my question about the horror imagery, actually nightmare is probably the most accurate word for it. This kind of nightmare logic and this nightmarish imagery. What did you make of the way that it created its visual horror language?
I was surprised by it, like, because I think there's just something about, especially with like horror that is getting like a lot of attention, is that it's not actually going to like go there, you know, like as much as I love Get Out, Get Out isn't like fundamentally a scary film to me, or like The Babadook isn't like that scary a film to me. It's like that there's so much interesting stuff going on, but it's not like the like full like hiding behind a pillow and like, what was that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I was quite surprised when that film like really delivered on that side of things, about like, oh my god, that's a horrible thing, that's so much worse than what I thought it was gonna be.
So what were some of those really, really scary moments for you?
Well, I thought the witch was a metaphor. I didn't realize like a giant terrifying thing was gonna emerge. And the way that it like I mean, like, you know, there's not too much violence, but in this, like, the way that it like physically like puts its hands into his wound, like I felt that in my bones. Like I found that very difficult to watch, but like in a good way.
And you know, we're gonna mention haunted houses and hauntings, and there's a big turning point in this film towards the end. Yes. What did you make of the turning point, Layla?
I love the point, because, okay, like, I love a twist in any film, but what is the best type of twist is a twist where you don't even see it coming. Because a lot of films, like, you do have that thing about, like, oh, I wonder what the twist is going to be, and then it kind of either works out or it doesn't. But in this, I didn't even know that there was going to be one, and it's so devastating when it happens.
Absolutely same. I'm not to, you know, sound pretentious, but it's when you watch a lot of films, you kind of can see a lot of stuff coming. I was shocked by the twist.
Yeah. When I had my screener, my friend Leo came around and my husband was there. When the twist happened, you just felt like, I think somebody may have actually like let out like a moan. It's just like, oh God. Like, oh yeah, we were like super bummed out, but like in the best way, where it's just like, oh my God, I thought I was already getting so much from this film, and then like another like punch in the heart. But yeah, anyway.
So what do you think this twist adds in terms of additional layering to the film?
I think it just adds a lot of complexity to what we've seen before. Like, it would have worked perfectly fine without the twist, and I still would have been like on board with it. But like in that twist, we kind of see like the desperation, the humanity, and like the what people have to go through in order to come to this country and then be treated like shit. And it kind of reminded me, I remember a few years ago when there was like a real thing in the news of the camps in Calais when the Syrian migrant crisis was starting, and there was this stuff in the Daily Mail which I would occasionally read for celebrity gossip. Like, I wouldn't buy it, but like I'd go on the internet, and all about like, look at the scandal of this. These people have iPhones and smartphones, and I was like, yeah, what the fuck do you think is happening outside of this country? It's like, these aren't people that like come out of like the world of Tarzan or something like that. These are like, and for all intents and purposes, Rial and Sol are a middle class couple in a horrifically grim and desperate situation in South Sudan. They're like bilingual. They've had to do some shit and put up with some shit to get here. They had to make some terrible choices, but you wouldn't wish that choice on your worst enemy, the position they were put in.
And how do you think kind of the film explores this idea of kind of a supernatural debt that they have to repay?
No, it's just so sad, isn't it? Like, and I think this is really like down to like Seppe's skill as an actor, that he's almost like a living Rodin sculpture at times, where you just feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, even when he's trying not to show it. Yeah, I mean, what for you did the like portrayal of that tragedy seem like what's the word, justifiable? Like, because I guess it's one of those things of just like, well, are we exploiting a real life tragedy for like our amusement? It's the question with these things.
I love how you turn around this podcast on me.
Well, I am always interested to hear what you think.
I actually, it's interesting that you mentioned kind of, does this exploit a tragedy? I had not thought of this. I did not feel it to be exploitative. Like, in no way, shape, or form have kind of the same relationship with that particular conflict, or even knowledge about it, really. I'm quite ignorant, I must admit, about that. But it didn't feel exploitative because of the way that it was written, because of the character building, because it makes sense narratively. And like you describe it, there is such a weight of guilt and of a bubbling tension that is there. It's there in the air between Bol and Rial. And the film so delicately maneuvers us, I think, from thinking that it's about this immigrant experience, about the desire to fit in, but also kind of the conflict of not letting go of who they are, of their own culture, and of protecting themselves against quite a hostile English environment. But then once you know the whole story, it completely transforms the film. It's one of those very rare films that actually, I think, will get better upon rewatches, because you'll be able to pick up the additional layers just in their relationship.
Yeah.
And
just in like the moment where he suggests to her we could start a family. Like, all of a sudden that is a completely different.
Totally.
Yeah.
And also just visually kind of these, which is the reason why I was bringing up kind of the way that it visually articulates a haunting and ghosts. It's because these are not just spooky looking creatures that are popping out of the walls. They are kind of direct manifestations of very, very horrible experiences that were only really hinted at in the film.
Yeah.
So when we see more of those experiences, and especially kind of this this kidnapping of this girl, this and her death, this terrible weight on their shoulders that they're carrying,
Yeah.
suddenly the imagery gains a completely new level. It's not just spooky people, it's not just ghosts or witches or creatures of the netherworld. It's a supernatural force that is actually wrapped itself around a very, very human experience.
Yeah. Very true.
And I think it's incredibly confronting. And I think you used this word before. And I think it's confronting because it forces us, via very, very good, very smart storytelling, it forces us to think about difficult choices. And it forces us to think about, not in a very kind of, oh my God, what would I do in that situation? No, it's like every single person will have had difficult situations or things that they're ashamed of, or that carry with them that they wish they had gone through, or that they wish, they hadn't made a decision they made. And that can manifest in different ways. And kind of this horror film, and horror in general, I think, is so, when articulated right by talented people, can visually manifest and visually explore things that are too difficult sometimes to articulate, even internally.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely an element of, sometimes, like recently there's been some like really horrific stories in the news about people and children dying in the Channel crossing. And, it wasn't that long ago that there was that awful thing with people that died in the freezing lorry that like came over. And there is an element that I think we all do for this, and not for entirely selfish reasons, sometimes literally for the sake of our own mental health, about like, I'm literally not even going to read this. I'm not going to like confront it, because like, how do you then go about your day with the weight of that on you? But then these people have no choice.
Yeah. It's like, the biggest privilege that you can have is being able to choose not to deal with difficult things.
Yeah.
And Boal and Rial don't have that choice available to them.
But I'm very interested to hear from you, because when I was talking to Remi Weekes, one of the things that I asked him was, like, there's all these like little microaggressions that they get. I mean, there's some very obvious aggressions where they just get from people like telling them to fuck off home. But then there's like all these like little microaggressions that they get from people about like things they should be grateful for, or like people are passive aggressive, or a lot of the time people speak kind of at them as if they're not in the room. Like, was that very obvious to you watching it as a white person? Because like, it was super obvious to me, but I wasn't sure if you like haven't experienced that, and it happens a lot. Whether
I read that in your interview actually before we jumped onto this, and I think it's a really, really smart question. And I think about this a lot when I watch films that are not kind of directly reflective of my experience, but for my own personal background, I'm a constant immigrant. I've never lived in a country where I was born, and I've never lived in a country where I kind of, yes, I'm a basic white girl, but I grew up in Spain. I don't look Spanish. Yeah. And, I've moved around a lot, so I've always lived through the immigrant experience.
And you feel that's like quite universal?
I don't think it's universal. I'm very aware of the fact that I've been able to, by the sheer way that I look, and also, frankly, the way that I sound, the fact that I don't have an accent, that's very placeable. That's a massive privilege that has allowed me to circumvent many things in different countries in different ways. So it's a constant adjustment, I think, is probably the simplest way of saying that. That you have to jump around and make yourself palatable and make yourself fit in, while also experiencing constant reminders that you're never actually going to fit in. And at a certain point in your life, you kind of let go of it and you're like, well, fine, sure.
You can also kind of, I mean, personally, I feel I can kind of protect myself in my bubble of like reasonably central London.
Yeah. So going back to your question, I could see a lot of the microaggressions. I probably did not see many others. I could see the microaggressions that we're referring to very, very obviously being someone who is not from that country, and this pressure of being grateful, but also this tension between Bol and Rial of wanting to fit in and wanting to other yourself very directly and very explicitly. And I've seen that firsthand. You know, it's a very, very common thing, I think, between immigrant communities of we will separate ourselves because why are we going to try to fit in when they're never going to let us fit in? So we're not even going to try.
Yeah. There's a fabulous line where she says to him that, like, you're just, like, grateful for unseasoned scraps.
Yes! And to be honest, the whole seasoning thing, I love because that was also a big cultural shock for me when I moved to the UK.
Same. So, I mean, it's been a while. Still jars me at times.
Oh, all the time. I mean, you know, as a total aside, the first time I ate food at an English person's house and they served a massive giant salad of iceberg lettuce with just cucumber that was the size of my fist and like no seasoning and no dressing. I was...
No dressing?
Clutched my pearls, Layla.
Oh, God. Yeah, no, I mean, the number of times where I just had to, like, you know, be polite and, well, someone made me something and they proudly told me that they didn't believe in using salt.
What?
Yeah, it's tough.
Jesus. Okay. But to go back to your point, I have no doubt that this film speaks to different people on different layers, and I will have picked up on some of the microaggressions that he quite very, very smartly fits into the film.
Yeah, and with a real naturalism, you know, it's so kind of well done. It's not heavy-handed.
Yeah.
You don't feel at all that he's trying to like beat a message into you. This feels very like natural to someone's experience.
And I actually wanted to ask you about one of the things that kind of really did struck me is the way that he almost satirically portrays kind of quote unquote well-intentioned white folk.
I know, and I was just, oh my God, Remy Weeks, just wonderful, wonderful human being. He, like, I just, you know, often when I'm watching a film that I really, really like and I'm thinking about what I love about it, I can see the worst version of the film. And in the worst version of this film, Matt Smith is a monster rather than like actually like a decent guy doing his best who has just had, as a society, like there has just been something ingrained in him which is nasty and insidious, and which is something that like we as a society in the UK are being like really like restrained and poisoned by, which is at the end of the day, this person, by not being born in Britain, is less than me. And like, as much as kind of people would be horrified for you to suggest that this is like racist or a problem, that is just a base level at which they are operated, which is why they are constantly expecting Rial and Bol to be grateful for the things that they got simply by being born where they were born.
Yep.
Which is crazy. Like, why is that a revolutionary idea?
It's not. But I do wonder kind of about you kind of talked about kind of elevated, politically minded, if not necessarily kind of, I don't think this is overtly political, although I mean it kind of is, but it's not trying to.
But it's like the political act is kind of just in telling these people's story and telling them as three-dimensional human beings.
It's not a sort of message film, although it is very kind of politically savvy. But I do wonder kind of about the way that this film is received. I mean, it's gotten rave reviews and all of that, and it's obviously going to be, it is available now on Netflix, so there's going to be a lot of access to it, which I think is amazing. But
I have to give you some bad news in that, like, I always, in order to make sure that I can remember everyone's names right, I have the IMDb in front of me, and the user ratings are not good. There's like a lot of 0 stars, a lot of 1 stars. I think the average is 5 stars out of 10.
Why would you do this?
But because, sorry, but I'm just saying, like, you know, as much as we could blame politicians for all of the like bad things that happen, like this is actually quite a base level of like, there's a lot of shitty people that just in like having 3-dimensional human immigrants, they kind of consider that like, oh, it's the fucking woke police, or it's like all of this stuff, which virtue signaling, which, you know, really fuck off. Like just like making a black person a 3-dimensional character in a film is not something that should be like demonized by anyone.
Absolutely. And actually, I mean, considering that we've spoken a lot about wokeness in our previous conversation around the Craft legacy, and we've spoken about the smart writing of characters and embedding them with all of their history, as opposed to just signaling any kind of political stance or wokeness. So what I'm getting at is kind of asking you, how do you think this film will be talked about, considering everything that we've been talking about, considering this sort of pushback that you've just referenced from horror fans against anything that kind of deviates from the, I don't know, the schlocky kind of traditional type of storytelling and the beats that they're accustomed to? That was smart, interesting, innovative filmmaking in its day, but kind of really isn't anymore now. Now this is interesting, innovative filmmaking.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to predict with these things, aren't there? Because like you're given hope by the fact that like something like Get Out was given its due. But I've never gone broke underestimating the British public when it comes to a lot of this stuff. So, I mean, I hope so. I hope people will kind of see it for what it is and not trying to like attach some like a prejudice that they already have in it. But like Remi Weekes deserves all of the credit for this, and I think hopefully Netflix do seem to be like really pushing it, that it will also get an audience in America, and that everybody who's been part of it is going to really like get their due, because it's just really interesting, exciting, intelligent filmmaking, and it's what we need more of.
Very well said. And I think that's a really, really great note to end on as well. Is there anything that we haven't discussed about his house that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I think I covered it. Did I mention that I liked it?
I don't know. I think your whole kind of this whole conversation kind of reads to me as a 3-star review, maybe.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you know, it depends what else is being released. But I gotta say, it's like, I think it's interesting that for me today is like such an exciting day for film, because we've got His House, Relic, Mogul Mowgli, Wolf Walkers, African Apocalypse, like all of these exciting films are coming out. Oh, Painter and the Thief. But the one I am seeing the most buzz about online is people seem to be most excited for His House.
Yes.
But that is within my kind of film Twitter bubble, so...
Layla, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and also all of your personal insight into this film. It's been really, really amazing to hear. It's given me a whole kind of, I don't know how many layers we've got already. 17th layer to His House.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited to see what Remi Weekes does next.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we're going to see Woomy in the Marvel universe, and I think just Sope, hopefully something set in the summer where he's shirtless.
Yes, with some rolled up sleeves, please. That would be fabulous. Thank you very much.
We've had a tough year. Yeah, it's what we need.
We need this right now. Please do it for the female gaze, please. We need it. So Layla, where can people find more of your work online?
Well, if you follow me on Twitter, Layla_Latif, I shamelessly post everything that I do there, but I'll be on BBC Two at 9:30 on November 7th, introducing the new BBC lineup of films, which is super exciting.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you again for having me on, especially for a film that, like, I honestly could just talk about all evening. I might go rewatch it. Would that be lame?
No, do it. I'm definitely rewatching it this weekend.
Well, happy Halloween weekend to you. I feel like this is like our horror fans. This is like our Christmas.
Yes, it is. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Bye.